The signal came without warning. One moment the space beyond Neptune was empty. The next it was full of ships. Not 5, not 20. 412 Vorthine warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel in a single synchronized instant, the kind of military precision that took centuries to master. Their hulls were dark red, shaped like the bones of massive creatures, each vessel longer than most Earth cities. They hung there in the black and said nothing for 11 minutes. Then they spoke. The message reached every human device at once. Every phone, every radio, every screen on every colony from Earth to the outer belt. The voice was deep and translated perfectly into every human language at the same moment, which was somehow the most frightening part. It meant they had been watching for a long time. The voice belonged to High Warlord Drak, Supreme Commander of the Vorthine Dominion's military arm. He did not introduce himself. He did not need to. He told humanity it had 72 hours to sign a submission charter. The terms were simple. Earth would hand over all warships, all weapons platforms, and all military technology. The colonies on Mars and Titan would become Vorthine resource territories. Humans would continue to exist, work, and breed, but under Vorthine administration. In exchange, no human city would be burned from orbit. He had delivered this same message 11 times before, to 11 other species. All 11 had signed. Then the signal ended. On Earth, the silence that followed lasted about 4 seconds. Then every government on the planet started screaming at each other. The United Earth Council convened within the hour. The chamber was designed for 200 delegates. That day, over 300 pushed inside. The noise was enormous. Some delegates wanted to negotiate. Some wanted to submit immediately and preserve lives. Some wanted to fight. A few were simply crying. None of them agreed on anything. Admiral Rael Dorn sat at the back of the room and did not speak for a long time. He was not the loudest man in any room he entered. He was not the tallest or the most decorated. He had a plain face, short gray hair, and the kind of stillness that made people nervous without knowing why. He had fought in the border wars of 2189, the Titan Uprising, and the 3-year conflict over the asteroid mining lanes that no history book had yet given a clean name to. He had lost people in all of them. He had won in most of them. He listened to the chamber argue for 90 minutes. Then, a delegate near the front noticed him sitting there and called out for the admiral to speak. Dorn stood up. The room went quiet faster than anyone expected. He looked at the viewscreen still showing the Vorthine fleet hanging beyond Neptune. He looked at the delegates. He did not raise his voice. He said, "Get me my fleet." That was all. The vote that followed was not unanimous, but it was enough. The council authorized a full military response and gave Dorn operational command of every warship Earth and its colonies could put into space. What Earth had was not pretty. The unified fleet was not a gleaming armada built for parades and diplomatic visits. It was a collection of ships assembled over 80 years of hard conflict, each one carrying the scars of previous wars. Patrol frigates with mismatched hull panels, heavy cruisers with engine modifications that made them faster but louder, converted mining vessels carrying railgun arrays bolted to their frames, destroyers that had been repaired so many times the original manufacturers would not have recognized them. 161 ships in total. Every captain aboard had seen real combat. Most of them had lost crew. All of them knew what losing felt like and had chosen to keep doing the job anyway. Out beyond Neptune, Sub-Warlord Hessa watched the human response on her sensors and filed a report to Drak. She told him the humans were mobilizing a fleet. She included the ship count and her initial assessment of their vessel classes. Her final line read, "Recommend we revise our engagement timeline and gather more intelligence before proceeding." Drak read the report. Then he laughed, long and genuine, in the way that powerful beings laugh when something small tries to stand up to them. He told Hessa to hold the fleet in position. He wanted to watch the humans organize themselves before he ended it. He found it entertaining. The 72-hour clock ran down in full view of both sides. Earth's fleet assembled in a loose formation between Mars and the asteroid belt. They had not tried to hide. There was no point in hiding. Dorn had given his captains their orders, their coordinates, and one instruction above all others: do not fire first. When the last second of the deadline expired, Dorn opened a channel that reached the Vorthine fleet, the Earth Council, and every colony in the system simultaneously. His voice was calm, completely calm, the kind of calm that is not the absence of feeling, but the result of a decision already made and fully accepted. He said, "This is Admiral Rael Dorn commanding the unified fleet of Earth. We have reviewed your terms. We have considered them carefully. This is our answer." He paused for exactly 1 second. "We decline." In the Vorthine command chamber, Drock's smile faded slowly, the way light fades at the end of a day. He looked at his fleet display for a long moment. Then he looked at Hessa. She said nothing. She was already running new calculations. Drock straightened and gave the order to advance. The war had begun. The Vorthine did not charge. That was their first mistake. They advanced slowly in 3 perfect columns, the way a superior force moves when it is not afraid. And why would they be afraid? Their forward strike group alone numbered 110 ships, each one larger than anything Earth had built. Their weapons had vaporized moons. Their armor had shrugged off attacks from civilizations far older than humanity. They had done this before. They knew exactly how it went. What they did not know was that 3 weeks before the deadline expired, Admiral Dorn had sent 600 unmanned drones into the debris field between Saturn and open space, a region humans called the Cassini Corridor. The drones carried no weapons. They carried something more useful: kinetic mines, each one disguised to look like a natural chunk of rock. The corridor was already full of real rocks. Nobody would notice 600 more. The Vorthine forward column entered the corridor on a straight-line approach. Their sensors swept the field, flagged the debris as non-threatening, and the column kept moving. The mines detonated in sequence. The first 14 Vorthine ships were gone before a single human crew member pulled a trigger. The detonations were not enormous. Each mine was small, precise, built to punch through a specific point in Vorthine hull architecture, a weakness that Earth's intelligence teams had spent 4 years identifying from old sensor data, and recovered debris from a Vorthine patrol ship that had drifted into human space and been quietly boarded 18 months ago. That information had never been made public. Dorn had been saving it. The Vorthine column shattered its formation and spread out, trying to clear the minefield by mass. That was when Commodore Ivar San brought in the vanguard. 12 fast attack ships, moving in pairs, running at speeds that pushed their engines to the edge of structural failure. They did not line up and exchange fire the way Vorthine doctrine expected. They came in from 6 different angles, fired, and moved before the return shots arrived. Hit and gone. Hit and gone. The Vorthine point defense systems were designed for enemies that held still long enough to target. San's ships refused to hold still for even 2 seconds at a time. 3 of his ships took serious hits. One lost its forward section entirely, and the surviving crew sealed themselves into the rear compartments and kept the ship moving, using its wreckage as cover while they reloaded. A human crew in a destroyed ship, still finding ways to be useful. The Vorthine tactical computer flagged this as an anomaly and spent several seconds trying to classify it. Those seconds cost them 2 more ships. On Dorn's bridge, Captain Nora Vance stood at the sensor array and watched the engagement with the focused quiet of someone doing arithmetic in their head. She saw what San saw. She also saw something San did not have the angle to notice. The Vorthine fought in tight formations. It made them devastating against conventional opponents because their combined firepower could concentrate on a single target and reduce it instantly. But tight formations required constant communication between ships to maintain. Every Vorthine captain was waiting for orders before adjusting their position. They were precise, disciplined, and completely unable to react to something unexpected without a signal from above. Humans did not fight that way. Human captains made decisions on their own. They could adapt while the orders were still being written. Vance flagged her observation and sent it to every captain in the fleet with one line added: "Stop trying to match their power. Fight like you do not have any." The message landed differently on every captain who read it, but they all understood it the same way. The engagement in the Cassini corridor lasted 4 hours and 19 minutes. When it ended, the Vorthine had lost 31 ships destroyed and 14 more too damaged to fight. Earth had lost 9 ships and over 1,000 people. By any cold calculation, it was a costly draw. In terms of tonnage and firepower, the humans had taken the worst side of the exchange. But the Vorthine strike force retreated. That had never happened before. Not once in 600 years of Vorthine military history had a forward strike force pulled back. The Vorthine High Council had records of every engagement the Dominion had ever fought. They searched those records after the corridor engagement, looking for a precedent. They found nothing. No entry. No category for it. Subwarlord Hesse filed her assessment within the hour. She wrote it in plain language, without technical decoration. She told the council that the humans did not fight to survive. They fought to make the enemy lose. She wrote that their tactics showed evidence of adaptation during contact, meaning they were changing their approach in real time, mid-battle, based on what they were seeing. She recommended a full tactical review before any further engagement. She also quietly noted, in a single line near the bottom, that she had recommended caution before the corridor engagement as well. Drock read the report. He read Hesse's note at the bottom. His jaw tightened slowly. He told her that the corridor had been an acceptable test, that the humans had fought better than expected, but that the outcome was never in question. He had more ships. He had better ships. 600 years of victory behind him. He told her he would lead the next engagement himself. Hesse nodded and left the room. She went back to her station and began running numbers, not for the next battle, but for the point at which the arithmetic would stop working in the Dominion's favor. She found that number faster than she expected. She saved the file and said nothing to anyone. Somewhere in the Vorthine fleet, a new type of weapon was being loaded. Nobody on Earth knew this yet. The 6 days were not wasted on the human side. On Mars, the colony's underground repair bays ran around the clock. Welders worked in 8-hour shifts and then went asleep on cots beside the machines and woke up and worked again. Families who had evacuated from the surface settlements dug into the deep rock levels and kept the power stations running, because without power, the fleet got nothing. Children, too, young to understand the war, understood that the lights had to stay on, and that they could help by not asking for more than their share of the rations. Most of them did not ask. On Titan, the fuel refineries converted every available storage tank to military-grade propellant. The refinery workers were not soldiers. They were engineers, technicians, and laborers who had come to Saturn's moon for regular pay and better benefits than Earth's crowded cities offered. They had not signed up for a war. But when the message went out asking for volunteers to extend their shifts, almost all of them stayed. This was the part of human war that other species never fully understood. The Vorthine had professional armies and professional support chains, organized by rank and paid by contract. When the Dominion went to war, the people who were not soldiers went home and waited for it to be over. That was the sensible arrangement. Humans did not do that. They did something that, from the outside, looked almost irrational. They showed up. People with no training, no weapons, and no clear role found roles anyway. A retired cargo pilot flew supply runs between Earth and the fleet staging area for 3 weeks using her own ship and her own fuel, billing no one. A university physics team in Oslo worked without sleep to improve the targeting algorithms on 2 destroyer classes. submitted their work through an open channel, and went back to teaching when it was accepted. A 16-year-old in the Jakarta corridor figured out a flaw in the Vorthine mine detection pattern based on publicly available sensor data and sent the analysis to every military channel he could find. Someone at Fleet Command actually read it. Dorn read it too and passed it to Vance, and Vance spent an afternoon improving on it, and a version of that 16-year-old's idea ended up embedded in the fleet's forward sensor protocol before the next engagement. This was humanity at war. Messy, distributed, loud, argumentative, and nearly impossible to fully destroy because it was not coming from one place. But the cost was real. The fleet had lost 9 ships in the corridor, 9 crews. The names were read on a general channel and then archived, and then the fleet moved on because there was no other choice. Dorn was aware that every name on that list was a person who had trusted the plan and followed orders and died doing it. He carried that the way he carried everything, quietly and without putting it down. He sat across from Commodore San in a briefing room 3 days after the corridor and looked at the damage report for the Vanguard. San had lost 4 of his 12 ships outright and had 3 more in repair. His face carried new lines that had not been there before the battle. Dorn asked him a direct question. He asked if the Vanguard could run the same tactic again. San said yes without hesitating. Then he paused and added that he wanted to change one thing. He wanted to go in with more decoys next time, so the fast ships did not have to absorb so many hits while the Vorthine targeting locked on. He had been thinking about it for 3 days. Dorn approved it. He also privately noted that San had spent 3 days thinking instead of simply repeating what had worked. That was something. Then the new weapon showed itself. On the 6th day of quiet, Vorthine scouts began appearing at the edges of the asteroid belt in small groups, 2 or 3 ships at a time, not advancing, just watching. Vance flagged the pattern immediately. Scouts in groups meant they were mapping something. She pulled the sensor logs and found that every scout pass was focused on the same region, the approach corridor between the belt and Mars. She brought it to Dorn and told him she thought the Vorthine were preparing a suppression strike, not against the fleet, against Mars itself. The idea was to force the fleet to split. If Mars was under attack, Dorn would have to send ships to defend it, and a divided fleet was a defeatable fleet. It was a sound tactical idea, and it showed that someone on the Vorthine side was thinking carefully. Dorn looked at the map for a long time. Then he said that they would not split the fleet. Instead, he would do something the Vorthine would not expect from a species that was supposedly fighting for survival. He pulled the fleet back, closer to Earth, and let the Vorthine think they had created separation. Then he would use the approach corridor against them. He did not explain the full plan to San. He told him to trust it. San looked at him, the way people look at someone when they are not completely sure, but have decided to follow anyway. He said, "Understood, Admiral." 3 days later, the Vorthine full fleet began to move. All 400 remaining warships, advancing in the formation that had never failed. On every human ship, screens lit up with the size of what was coming. Nobody ran. That too was something. The Vorthine fleet moved in 3 columns, and the sight of them on long-range sensors was enough to make experienced officers go silent. 400 warships, advancing in perfect order, their hulls throwing long shadows across the light of distant stars. It was the kind of display meant to communicate one simple thing: this is already over. On every human ship, the crew saw the same sensor feed. And they stayed at their posts. Dorn had spent 4 days preparing the ground. The approach corridor between the asteroid belt and Mars was not empty space. It looked like empty space, but across a 2-million-kilometer stretch, human engineers had placed over 3,000 objects. Some were weapons, some were decoys, some were sensor relays broadcasting false ship signatures, and some were just debris, placed to make the real threats harder to distinguish from noise. The whole field had been designed by Vance and a team of 6 people working on almost no sleep, built on one core idea. Do not give the Vorthine a clear target. Give them a maze. The first Vorthine column hit the outer edge of the field and began to advance. Their point defense systems started clearing debris methodically. Dorn watched and waited. He let them come in deep, past the point where pulling back would be a clean withdrawal. Then he collapsed the outer layer on purpose. The decoy ships and relay drones at the edges shut down at once, and the Vorthine sensors suddenly showed the human fleet much closer than expected, clustered at the far end of the corridor. The Vorthine columns accelerated. They wanted to close distance and bring their main weapons to bear. That was exactly wrong. The corridor narrowed as it approached the human position, a natural feature of the asteroid density that Vance had factored into the design. 3 Vorthine columns, each hundreds of ships wide in open space, were now compressing into a single dense mass inside the narrowing field. Their advantage in numbers was becoming a problem. Ships were adjusting their positions to avoid collisions. Communication between captains was becoming crowded. The perfect formation was beginning to fray. San's vanguard hit them from the left flank. He had 17 ships this time, plus 30 decoys that read as ships on Vorthine sensors. The real ships moved between the decoys in a shifting pattern that made it impossible to tell, from inside, which targets were worth shooting at. The Vorthine spent ammunition and time on ghost signals, while San's actual ships fired real weapons and repositioned before the return fire arrived. From the Vorthine flagship, Drock watched the battle display with growing tightness in his chest. His formations were adapting, but too slowly. Every time a Vorthine captain understood what was happening in their section of the field and began to counter it, the human ships had already changed their approach. His tactical network, which worked by sending instructions from the top down through a chain of command, could not keep pace. The humans were not waiting for instructions. Each ship was making its own calls. Then Vance did something that no Vorthine commander had ever had done to them in 6 centuries of war. She broke into their communication frequency. She had spent 3 days studying the signal patterns from the Cassini corridor engagement. Vorthine fleet communication used a layered encoding system, very secure, but it relied on all ships using the same base frequency. Once she found the frequency, she did not jam it, which the Vorthine would have detected and compensated for. Instead, she duplicated it, and for 11 minutes she sent false position orders to 3 Vorthine squadrons on the right flank, redirecting them into each other's firing lanes. The result was not a massacre. The Vorthine were disciplined enough that most captains hesitated when the orders seemed wrong, but hesitation in a moving battle has a cost. For 11 minutes, 30 ships on the Vorthine right flank did nothing except try to verify orders that were never coming from anyone real. 30 ships removed from the engagement for 11 minutes. Dorn used those 11 minutes. The human heavy cruisers, which had been hanging at the back of the formation, advanced together in a single concentrated push along the center of the corridor. They were slower ships, less maneuverable, and in any open engagement they would have been taken apart. Inside the corridor, with debris on both sides and the Vorthine already confused, they hit the compressed Vorthine center like a fist. Drock personally ordered his flagship forward to stabilize the center. He nearly made it work. He was, despite everything, an experienced commander with 600 years of institutional military knowledge behind him. San intercepted him. What was left of the vanguard, 8 ships in heavy repair, threw themselves across the flagship's approach vector and refused to move. They absorbed fire that should have ended them. One ship lost its engine and drifted into a direct hit. Its reactor did not breach cleanly. The explosion took 2 Vorthine ships with it. When the engagement ended, the Vorthine had lost 94 ships destroyed and 40 more too damaged to continue. Earth had lost 38 ships. Thousands of humans were dead. San was in an escape pod, alive, listening to the battle chatter on a handheld relay. The Vorthine pulled back to regroup. Hesse looked at the numbers on her screen for a long time. Then she looked at Drak, who was standing with his hands behind his back, completely still, staring at the display showing his reduced fleet. She said nothing. There was nothing to say that the numbers had not already said more clearly. She opened a private file on her terminal, the one she had saved after the Cassini corridor. She added the new figures. Then she began composing a message to Ambassador Åland. The Vorthine High Council convened without Drak. That detail alone told the story. In 600 years, the High Council had never held a military review session without the commanding warlord present. Drak was not removed. Not yet. But he was not in the room, and everyone in the room knew what that meant. Hesse presented the numbers. She did not frame them as a moral argument or an emotional appeal. She was Vorthine, and the Vorthine responded to facts arranged in clear order. She showed the council the attrition rate from 3 engagements: ships lost, ships damaged, ammunition expended, repair time required for the remainder of the fleet. Then she showed the projection forward. If the Dominion continued the campaign at current rates and achieved victory in every remaining engagement, the total cost in ships, fuel, logistics, and time would be 9 times the assessed value of Earth's combined resources. The conquest of Earth would make the Dominion poorer. The council chamber was very quiet. One senior member asked if the projections assumed continued human resistance at the same intensity. Hesse said no. She had assumed the humans would get worse. They had improved their tactics in every engagement so far. There was no reason to believe that pattern would reverse. A second member asked about an orbital bombardment, a direct strike on Earth's surface, bypassing the fleet entirely to remove the population's will to fight. Hesse pulled up a secondary file. She had expected this question. She showed them the data from the 11 previous conquests. In every case, the species targeted had a centralized government and a population that looked to that government for guidance. Destroy the leadership, and the people followed. Earth had a unified council, yes, but the military was decentralized in command. The civilian support structure was distributed across 3 planetary bodies, and the resistance, as demonstrated in the Cassini corridor and the Red Line, was coming from individual humans making individual choices. You could not bomb the decision out of them. You would have to kill all of them, and that would take a campaign longer and more expensive than the conquest itself. The room was quiet again. Meanwhile, on the human side, things were also complicated. Vance intercepted fragments of an encrypted signal moving from inside the Vorthine fleet toward a neutral relay station near Concord Point. She could not decrypt the full content, but the relay station was one used by Ambassador Åland of the Odyssey, and the signal's origin point was not Drak's command ship. It was from a secondary vessel, Hesse's ship. She brought it to Dorn and explained what she thought it meant. Dorn looked at the data for a moment. Then he said she was probably right. He also said they would not act on it directly. If Hesse was looking for an exit, giving her one mattered less than giving Drak one. A retreating enemy was manageable. A humiliated enemy with nothing left to lose was not. He sent his own message to Åland through a different channel. He asked the ambassador a single practical question. In all the Vorthine campaigns the Odyssey had observed, what was the minimum symbolic gesture the Dominion needed to withdraw without triggering an internal political collapse? Åland replied 6 hours later. His message was 3 sentences. He said the Dominion could not be seen to have simply failed. They needed a reason to leave that could be explained as a choice, and they needed the humans to not celebrate publicly in a way that required a Vorthine response. Dorn read it twice. Then he passed it to Vance and told her to keep it quiet. Drak, cut out of the council session and aware of Hesse's back-channel communications, did the thing that leaders do when they feel control slipping. He reached for something dramatic. He ordered 6 of his fastest destroyers to break away from the main fleet at maximum speed, running silent, no identification signals. Their target was not the human fleet. Their target was Earth itself, not a full bombardment, a strike on 3 major population centers, enough to cause mass casualties and shatter the civilian support structure that was keeping the fleet supplied. He did not inform the Council. He did not inform Hesse. He launched the strike at 300 fleet time while the Council was still deliberating. Dorn had not predicted this exactly, but he had considered it weeks ago when he was thinking through what a proud and cornered enemy might do. He had kept a reserve force of 20 ships in high Earth orbit, hidden inside the planet's sensor shadow, doing nothing visible for 10 days. Their crews had been bored and restless and had not been told why they were parked in the quiet dark. Now they knew. The 6 Vorthing destroyers came in at high speed and found 20 human ships waiting in an arrangement that left no clean exit. The battle lasted 31 minutes. 5 Vorthing destroyers were destroyed. The 6th lost power under concentrated fire and drifted. Human boarding teams moved in before the emergency power could be restored. For the first time in Vorthing history, one of their warships was taken intact. Its crew of 42 were alive, their command codes were still active in the system, and its weapons were functional. Earth had a Vorthing warship. On the Council ship, a member asked Hesse what the capture of a Dominion destroyer meant in terms of intelligence value. Hesse said it meant the humans had known about the strike before it happened, or had prepared for it anyway. Either answer was the same problem. She told the Council she recommended opening formal contact with the human commander. This time, nobody overruled her. The negotiation table at Concord Point was a simple thing, flat and gray, bolted to the floor of a room built for exactly this purpose. Ambassador Holland had arranged it. He had spent 30 years facilitating conversations between species that wanted to kill each other, and he had learned that the furniture mattered less than most people thought. What mattered was giving both sides a reason to sit down and a reason to stay seated. Hesse sat on one side, Dorn sat on the other. They did not shake hands. They did not bow. They looked at each other across the table the way that soldiers look at other soldiers when the shooting has stopped, with the specific kind of respect that has nothing to do with liking someone. Hesse opened. She said the Dominion was prepared to discuss terms. She did not use the word withdrawal. Dorn noted that and said nothing about it. The talks lasted 6 days. Holland sat at the end of the table and said very little. His job was to keep both sides in the room when they reached the points where leaving would have felt easier. There were several such points. On the second day, Hesse told Dorn directly that the Dominion would not accept any language suggesting that Earth had defeated a Vorthing fleet. Dorn said that he was not asking for language. He was asking for outcomes. What happened in history books was the Council's concern, not his. Hesse looked at him for a moment and then continued. On the 4th day, Dorn raised the question of the captured destroyer. He said Earth was prepared to return the ship, stripped of its command systems, as a gesture of good faith. Hesse said the Dominion would consider it. She did not ask what Earth had already learned from the ship, and Dorn did not volunteer the answer. Some things were better left between soldiers. On the 6th day, they reached agreement. The Vorthing Dominion would withdraw all forces from Sol space within 30 days. Earth, its colonies, and a buffer zone extending 1 light-year in all directions would be designated a protected sovereignty zone, a status that had never been granted to any other species in Vorthing history. No tribute, no oversight, no submission charter. In exchange, Earth would return the destroyer, refrain from publishing detailed accounts of Vorthing tactical losses, and would not actively assist any other species currently under Vorthing administration. That last point had been the hardest. Dorn had pushed back on it for most of the 5th day. Hesse had not moved. In the end, Dorn accepted it because the agreement was not the end of things. It was a door, and a door could be opened again later. When it was done, Hesse stood. Dorn stood. They did not speak. Hesse left first. Aland waited until she was gone, and then asked Dorn how he felt. Dorn said he felt tired. Aland said that was a reasonable response. He then told Dorn that the negotiation had been observed, not by any party present at the table, but through the relay channels that carried diplomatic communications across neutral space. 12 other species had been listening, including 4 that were currently under various forms of Vorthine administration. He said he did not know what those species would do with the information, but they had it. Dorn thought about what that meant for a moment. A galaxy full of species that had watched a new one refuse to submit, absorb everything the most powerful military in known space could deliver, and then negotiate a draw. Not a victory, technically, a draw, but the difference between submission and a draw was everything. He said he hoped those species made their own choices, and that Earth would not be blamed for whatever those choices turned out to be. Aland said that was very diplomatic for someone who was not a diplomat. Dorn said he had been around long enough to know how trouble traveled. Back on Earth's fleet, the mood was not celebration. There were ships with holes in them. There were repair crews working on damage that would take months to fix. There were 38 names that would never come off the memorial list, and thousands more with them. The people who were alive were grateful in the quiet way that survivors are grateful, which is not the same as happy. In a small room aboard the fleet flagship, Vance and San sat together without talking for a while. San had a new scar along his jaw from the escape pod's emergency seal. He looked at the star map on the wall, showing the Sol system and the space around it. The space was theirs again, at least for now. He said he wondered what came next. Vance said she did not know, but that whatever it was, she expected it to be loud and expensive and probably started by someone making a decision at 3 in the morning. San said that sounded about right. Dorn's voice came across the general channel before he reached Aland's departure bay. He did not give a speech. He did not list the victories or the losses or the terms of the agreement. He said 3 things. The fleet had held, the terms were signed, and all ships should begin standard maintenance rotation effective immediately. Then he closed the channel and walked out into the corridor and stood there alone for a moment. He looked out through a viewport at the stars. Old light, most of it. Light that had left its source before humans existed, traveling all this way to reach a species that had just told a galactic empire to turn around and go home. He exhaled once. Then he went back